Hi Year 7 and welcome to our final lesson on biblical allusions. Next week we are going to start a new topic and on Friday you'll have your final quiz about allusions, so make sure you submit the quiz on Friday. Okay, so our final biblical allusion will be about the story of the Good Samaritan, and our big questions are going to be: what can we learn from the story of the Good Samaritan, and how can I write and recognise allusions to the Good Samaritan? As usual, we're going to start with our daily review. Pause the video here and work your way through the 4 questions. Okay, so question 1. Tall and proud, the tree stood upon the hill. Is this an example of a double adjective sentence or a triple verb sentence? So hopefully, by looking at this particular sentence, you can see that it begins with these 2 words, tall and proud, and those are adjectives, and because there are 2 of them, this is a double adjective sentence. We can also see that there's only 1 verb in this sentence, which means that it couldn't be a triple verb sentence. Okay, question 2. Why could making a house of cards be described as a Sisyphean task? So a house of cards is that pyramid of cards propped up together. And that could be described as a Sisyphean task because just as you get to the top of the pyramid, it becomes quite unstable and often blows over. So it's one of those tasks that's quite difficult, quite laborious, and often unachievable. Question 3. The story of the hare and the tortoise. In the story of the hare and the tortoise, who is the underdog? So in this story, the hare has a race against a tortoise. Tortoises are known for being slow, so the tortoise was seen as the underdog, and this was one of those classic stories where the underdog triumphed. And then finally, what prompted Pandora to open the box? She was filled with curiosity, so it was curiosity, a desire to know, that caused her to open the box. So the story that we're going to look at today is a parable. A parable is a simple story used to teach a moral or spiritual lesson. An example of the word in a sentence: the Bible contains a series of parables. And then I just want you to have a think. Can you think of any other stories, perhaps stories that you've read in English, perhaps stories that you know that are designed to teach us something? Can you think of any examples? Okay, so parables can also be described as didactic stories. Some of you might have come across this word before, this word didactic. It means that they're designed to teach us. So to be didactic means to teach something. As we read the parable of the Good Samaritan, I want you to think about what readers of the Bible were supposed to learn from this story. What did they want to teach us through this story? Okay, and here is the story, the parable of the Good Samaritan. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbour as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbour?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he travelled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbour to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." Okay, so let's do a bit of closer reading before we start to answer our big question, what are we supposed to learn from this story? So, the first thing I would like you to find and identify is, what does the expert in law want to know? And the second thing I would like you to go into the text to find is the point at which Jesus begins to tell the parable of the Good Samaritan. So I want you to see where it switches from him talking to the man of law to him actually telling the story of the Good Samaritan. Find that point where that story starts. Pause the video here and have a go at those two questions for me, please. Okay, so hopefully you have identified that the expert in the law wanted to know what he must do to inherit eternal life. Sorry, my line is not very good there. He also asked, who is my neighbour? So he wanted to know who it is that he should love, that he should be kind to. So hopefully you've identified that those are the things that the expert in the law asked Jesus. Hopefully you've also noted the point at which the story begins. So the story begins here with the speech marks, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Okay, the next thing I would like you to do is again pause the video here and see if you can put a line under or just identify and write down the 3 people who passed the man in the street that's been robbed and beaten. So pause the video here and see if you can identify the 3 people that walk past this man. Okay. So the first person to walk past the beaten man is a priest. The second person to walk past the man and to cross the road and walk by on the other side was the Levite. Now both of these people are religious people who you would think would stop and help. And then the third person to pass by was a Samaritan. Now it was said that Samaritans despised Jews. However, it was the Samaritan who stopped and helped the man who was in need of help. So what does that tell us then? What do you think the story of the Good Samaritan might be trying to teach us about who our neighbour is? So with that in mind, I want you to answer the question in blue. What do you think that we're supposed to learn from the story of the Good Samaritan? It's a parable, so what are we supposed to learn from it? There might be more than one lesson that we're supposed to learn from it. Just pause the video and have a go at that question. Okay, so first and foremost, I think that we're supposed to learn that we should always help people in need. But the second thing that I think we're supposed to take away from this story, this parable, is the idea that when it comes to helping people in need, everyone is our neighbour, and we should put aside any differences that we might have, just as the Samaritan did to help the man on the street. So the Good Samaritan then today has come to mean, in an allusion, anyone who does a good deed for another person. So lots of writers still allude to the parable of the Good Samaritan by calling people who do good deeds Good Samaritans. Below is a headline from a newspaper article that we're going to read that's based around this idea of an act of kindness, being a Good Samaritan. Here is the headline: The pandemic of kindness. Will we be more considerate after coronavirus? 3 questions there to pause the video and work your way through. Okay, so first and foremost, what do you think this article might be about? Hopefully you've all had a bit of a guess of what you think we might be reading about. Secondly, what does the noun pandemic mean? So we're currently experiencing a global pandemic, and a pandemic is something that spreads quickly. And why might the writer have chosen this noun? Hopefully you've identified that they've chosen this noun because it shows that alongside the spread of coronavirus, there's also been a spread of kindness among people. And here is our extract from this particular article. Kerry Emerson was working as a physiotherapy assistant in a hospital in Birmingham when the pandemic struck. As for many of us, the twin safety nets of work and relationships were quickly whipped away. I'm considered high risk, so I wasn't allowed to be in the hospital, Kerry explains. Sitting at home with a growing sense of anxiety, she began to think of ways she could help her NHS colleagues without putting herself at risk. She decided to set up a support group for staff. The idea was to post messages of support, video workouts, healthy recipes and discussion topics. I also wanted to raise money through the GoFundMe page to provide morale-boosting extras like coffees for the people working in local hospitals. So far we've had an amazing response with offers of food, flowers, socks. The group now has more than 5,000 members, all working in some way to support the well-being of the local NHS staff. Kerry's is one of countless similar tales. In the past month, the majority of us have been galvanised into the kinds of good deeds and shows of compassion that in normal times we'd never think to engage in. From signing off emails to colleagues with a heartfelt "hope you are well and safe," to running for heroes and delivering food to vulnerable people. Australian psychologist Leah Waters has called this COVID kindness an emotional Mexican wave. Even something as simple as clapping for carers to clap for the NHS is to act out our compassion for the people risking their lives for our benefit. The question is, where could this groundswell of goodwill take us after the immediate crisis has passed? So, first and foremost, how do you think the person who is talking in this text, or giving a quotation, in this text, in what way do you think we could describe them as a Good Samaritan? And then finally, can you pause the video here and see if you can rewrite our headline to include an allusion to the Good Samaritan? So just rewrite the headline and try and work in the words Good Samaritan. Okay, so that brings us to our big questions for this lesson. What are we supposed to learn from the story of the Good Samaritan? And how can I write and recognise allusions to the Good Samaritan? What does it mean to call someone a Good Samaritan? Just pause and see if you can answer those two questions. At this point, if you have spent over 40 minutes on this lesson, you must stop here. If you have been working for under 30 minutes, then you must go on to the next task. So our additional tasks for today are a little bit different. I wanted to see if we can start our own Mexican wave of kindness. And by doing that, you can choose to complete any of the following tasks. So you could thank a Good Samaritan. Perhaps you know someone who has demonstrated kindness, either towards you or others, and write a letter to them to say thank you. It doesn't have to be anything to do with the current situation. It can be anything you like. Or additionally, see if you can be a Good Samaritan. Could you think of something you could do to put a smile on someone's face, a nice random act of kindness? Perhaps if you haven't already, you could think about taking part in the 749 challenge, because that's all about raising money for charity and for the NHS as well. I've seen loads and loads of really good ideas of different things that you're getting up to for this challenge as well. Okay, thank you very much.